Well, as COVID cases continue to decline here in Connecticut and across the nation, the CDC today has updated their mask guidance.
Joining us now to discuss what that means for the country and us here in Connecticut is Dr. Ulysses Wu with Hartford Healthcare. Thanks so much for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so what does this updated guidelines mean for us here in the state? They're talking about the CDC saying that some 70% of Americans are in areas with low or medium COVID transmission. So where are we now in the state?
So we've always done better, and we are certainly because of our vaccination rates. And so we are certainly transitioning to lower transmission. And so when you look at these protection guidelines, some of them happen on the federal level, some of them happen on the state level, and then some of them will happen on the local level. In the upcoming week, what we would expect is that the federal guidelines to be relaxed as well as the state guidelines, and that would leave it up to local level decision making because it's not as widespread all across the country at this time. And that's a good thing, which means that number one, or I should, that's being repetitive, number one, cases are decreasing across the country, but it still allows for the flexibility in some of those areas where transmission may be higher.
So, Dr. Wu, let's talk about schools. I understand that it goes back to the municipalities in general, but specifically about schools, is that just kind of the way it was already in the state, or does this specific federal guidance change anything on that local level for kids in classrooms?
Well, I don't think it necessarily changes anything. It just removes that extra layer of protection, but it still allows for local decision making to be made. For example, if there is a higher area of transmission associated within the district.
What's your recommendation for people? Should they be wearing masks indoors here in Connecticut?
That's a great question, and it really depends. And so exactly at this moment, we are still having transmission. The numbers are definitely decreasing, but we're experiencing what I would call a sawtooth pattern. And you may be seeing that with the positivity rate in the sense that sometimes it's down, sometimes it's up, but overall it's a trend down. So we're almost out of the woods for now, but we're not quite there at this point. And so what I would recommend is it really depends on the situation. If you're going to something like the grocery store where it's big, wide, open spaces and maybe not so many people, in a week or two, you may want to consider not wearing a mask. But if you're going to a party where you don't know vaccination status, you don't know if people are sick or not, and it's going to be in a small enclosed area that's going to be indoors, you may want to consider wearing a mask. And then there's the in between, something like sports events, and other things that may be very similar. It's going to be very dependent. But overall, I think in a couple of weeks, I think wearing a mask may not be necessary in a lot of these situations.
Dr. Wu, one last question here. I didn't even think about asking you this until right now. You've really been on the forefront of this pandemic, talking with us and other outlets as things have changed. Now we're seeing the mask guidance change. As someone who's been in the medical field for a while and has been in the forefront of this pandemic as a healthcare first responder, what do you see the next 6 months looking like, 6 to 12 months looking like as we start to maybe go into this endemic phase? Do you think people will still be wearing masks and just disregarding the guidance just because of their comfort level?
Yeah, absolutely. I do see people are going to wear masks. And there are some people with immunocompromised situations or their own health may be immunocompromised, which they may want to take that extra level of protection. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be any virus going forward. But if you're asking me for my prediction, absence of any new variants, I do believe that we're probably going to be okay until the late summer. And the reason I say late summer is that variants tend to arise in areas of low vaccination and high transmission. And so we would think about that in the Southern Hemisphere. We saw that last year with Delta and South Africa. So there is the possibility a variant could come in late summer. But if a variant doesn't come in late summer, then certainly I think we would be good throughout until the fall, where we would really certainly need to consider remasking, reboosting, revaccination at that point. So that could be the cycle of our life for the foreseeable future, which I mean maybe the next few years, and maybe COVID will burn itself out. It's difficult to say at this point, but that's my prediction. We should be good through the summer unless another variant comes. But come the fall, just like any other respiratory disease, we should start taking our precautions again.
Yeah, the good news is we are on this downward slope. So many people tired and weary from going through this for 2 years. Dr. Ulysses Wu, thank you so much for your expertise as always.
Thanks, Dr. Wu.
Thank you for having me.